Here we go with image number 1. Chase for a bride. That's a really interesting sport, isn't it? This is a super travel shot telling us a story with a lot of added atmosphere. The action is stopped at the right moment, plus all the crowd is intent on the action. Good movement in the horses, which gives you an idea of the speed they go. On the downside, the one problem is that the crowd is actually sharper than the two participants. But it's a great shot nevertheless. Wonder if the two guys caught between the action with the masks on knew something was coming about the coronavirus. Bunch sprint. This is a well-timed, well-executed shot with the riders in a super echelon formation and with enough blur in the spokes to give the impression of movement. I like the fact that you've also added the sprint line on bottom left. On the downside, only the rider at the end with the glasses on looks as though he's actually putting any effort in. And secondly, the fellow with the phone in his hand at the back centre is far too distracting. If there had been a full row of spectators, he wouldn't have stood out as much. So I wondered how the shot could be improved and put it into Photoshop and gave it a much tighter crop behind the last rider and taking it down to below the fella seated on the left. This really concentrated the image much more. We're only leaving the guy with the telephone's bottom half to be got rid of. A slower shutter speed and good panning technique would blur the signage more. Long before follow focus and digital, I used to do a lot of road racing work, and for the sprint finishes I would pre-focus on a spot just before the line, pan the riders from way out and press the button just before the riders got to the spot I'd pre-focused on. This seemed to work very well for me and got quite a few saleable shots. Formula Vintage. I like this one. An excellent record of the event. Highlight and shadow have been extremely well handled. The shutter speed's not bad, however a tad slower would have blurred both the wheels and the tyre barrier in the background just a bit more and improved the shot. Love the concentration on the two drivers' faces, especially the one at the back. I wondered who was overtaking who. I don't think it's actually going to win any prizes, but that doesn't take anything away from it. It is a really good shot. Corner ball. Not too much to be said about this rather simple shot. Compositionally speaking, the action's been stopped in the right moment, with the lad in mid-kick and the arms on the diagonal. But the after treatment, which looks slightly HDR, and the very, very saturated colours do nothing for the image at all for me. Downhill races. This one could also have been entitled Slow, Slow, Quick, Quick, Slow. It's a nice happy shot with smiling faces obviously enjoying the ride. I love the spacing you've allowed between the two protagonists, although they don't look too much as if they're racing, more a pastime than a sport. I like the way you've included the slow, slow signs, which gives you a nice curve round into the action, brings you round to the front girl, then takes you back to the back girl, which is a really nice spiral composition. The downside is the top right hand corner with the mountains in the distance. Not a lot you could have done about it, but nevertheless a really good attempt. High tackle. A great attempt here, but there's another rugby shot later on by, I suspect, the same author. Having said that, everything is there. All the aggression you could want, plus the fact you can nearly see all their faces. It's sharp, well exposed, bright and colourful. However, the background is too good to be true. Everything obtrusive, the crowd, the ref, other players, they've all gone. Either extreme look extremely lucky or it's a set-up shot. The big question for me is, why is the AstroTurf so sharp and yet the background gives me the impression it's been panned? Having said all that, this type of shot is very much in vogue, and judges in competitions aren't given that much time to look at it, and they'll just be concentrating on the faces of the rugby players. And it should do quite well, this one. Goat Polo. This shot wins the prize for the most unusual sport here. The blacks in the horse have been very well handled considering the lighting it must have been taken under. Love the way the horse's mane and the tail are streaming out behind, indicating the speed he is going at. The rider's face is sharp and interesting, obviously shouting out some order or something. But for me it leaves a lot of unanswered questions. Is he participating, riding off with the prize, or is he just there to put the goat into play? Should the horse's legs have been cut off? Maybe not, it does concentrate in on the rider. But having said all that, it is still another great travel shot. I'm sorry to the author of this shot, but there's not too much I can say about it. Yeah, it's a racing car on a racetrack, but a sports shot needs action of some sort, and there's just nothing going on. Yep, you've stopped the car well enough, but you need to be looking for different, more dynamic viewpoints, such as cornering, going in or out, or when they're overtaking, etc. Study the track beforehand and look for places where traditionally all the action takes place and wait there. Speaking for the image as presented, I would like to see it less saturated. Racing for Glory, yet another different sport to look at. This is a good, colourful image. The boat is sharp and has been well caught, with the blurred spray and water giving the impression of speed. Technically very well handled. This type of shot often poses the question, do I give it more space in front of the boat for the boat to run into at the expense of the spray behind? I think in this shot you've judged it just about right. I like the fact you've also presented it in a letterbox format. The tackle. As I said about the previous rugby shot, this type of image is very much in vogue. This one I really like. Technically perfect, extremely well lit, and with a super composition. Both faces are clear and with really good expressions of aggression and effort. The mono conversion is great, very well handled, and suits the image better than the colour. My previous comments about background, however, applies to this one as well, but in this case, much less so, with just the hint of the posts in the background. This shot should do very well in competition. In the lead again. Well executed and caught. A good action shot, sharp, well exposed. Highlights and shadows again very well handled and showing a slight degree of movement. On the downside, the rider and bike are far too tight and central in the frame for a competition sports image. It needs more space around it and more space for the rider to travel into. I'm not too familiar with this type of bike, so maybe my next comment may not be right, but it does look to me as if the image has been squashed from top to bottom. Maybe also because of a high viewpoint, I don't know. I can only comment on what's presented, but it does look slightly strange. Even so, a nice colourful action shot. Going under. There's a lot to like about this shot. The action has been very well captured and it's a very dynamic composition. The canoeist's face can be seen, which is sometimes a difficult thing to do in this kind of shot where the paddle often obscures the face, so well done for that. However, this is far too contrasty and over-sharpened, with very prominent halos and artifacts. Unless this is only a very small part of the whole image, A Nikon D750 should have produced a file big enough to be able to manipulate and still produce a better result. But as I said before, this has been very well captured.